Welcome to Terrormouth, where the night doesn't just hold secrets, it remembers them. Story 1: The Blackstone Hitchhiker, USA. It was a late September evening when Jake Sullivan found himself driving down the lonely stretch of Highway 78. The road cut through the thick forests of rural Oregon, winding its way past dense woods and dilapidated farmlands that seemed to be frozen in time. Jake had been on the road for hours, heading home to Portland after a long work trip in the south. The road was quiet, and the only company he had was the hum of his car's engine and the occasional crackling from the radio. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, leaving behind a thin sliver of purple twilight that bled into the night. A thick fog rolled in quickly, and within minutes, Jake could barely see past the front of his car. He cursed under his breath, fumbling for the dimmer switch to turn on the headlights. "Great," he muttered. "Just what I need." The road stretched endlessly before him, a ribbon of asphalt winding through an eerie, fog-choked landscape. There was no sign of life, no other cars, no towns, just the creeping mist and the occasional flash of a deer's glowing eyes reflected in the headlights. It was the kind of isolation that felt suffocating, and Jake couldn't shake the unsettling sensation that the forest around him was closing in. That's when he saw her. A figure appeared on the side of the road, standing motionless at the edge of the fog. Jake barely had time to react before his headlights illuminated her. She was tall, her long hair flowing in the wind, and she wore a dark coat that billowed around her in the mist. But what caught Jake's attention the most was her face, pale, almost ghostly, with hollow eyes that seemed to gleam in the dim light. Jake's heart skipped a beat, and his grip on the steering wheel tightened. He hadn't seen a single soul for miles, and now, this woman was standing in the middle of nowhere in the thick fog. Instinctively, Jake slowed the car down as he neared her. His mind raced, and he briefly considered passing her by, but then his conscience got the better of him. The woman looked stranded, and Jake didn't feel right leaving her out there alone in the cold. He rolled down his window, trying to make himself heard over the roar of the engine. "Hey, do you need a ride?" he called out, his voice uncertain. The woman didn't immediately respond. She just stood there, her face expressionless, staring at him through the mist. After a long moment, she finally spoke, her voice soft but clear. "Can you help me get to Blackstone?" she asked, her tone flat, almost hollow. Jake frowned, taken aback by her strange request. He'd never heard of Blackstone, and he had no idea how far away it was. The fog was making it difficult to see any road signs, and the uncertainty of the situation began to gnaw at him. Something about this woman felt wrong. "Blackstone? I've never heard of it," Jake replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "Are you sure it's around here?" She nodded slowly, her eyes not leaving his. "It's just ahead," she said, her words strangely measured. "You can't miss it." Jake hesitated, looking at her for a moment longer. The fog was thickening, and the silence of the road was oppressive. His instincts told him to keep driving, to ignore the strange hitchhiker and the eerie request. But something in her gaze made him want to help. She looked so lost, so out of place. "All right, get in," he said, finally giving in. The woman opened the passenger side door and slid into the car. Jake noticed her movements were unnervingly smooth, almost unnatural. She didn't speak as he pulled back onto the road, the engine humming loudly in the stillness. Her silence only added to the uneasy atmosphere as they drove. Jake tried to make small talk to ease the tension. "So, where are you coming from?" he asked, glancing over at her. She didn't answer right away, and for a moment, Jake wondered if she had even heard him. But then, her voice broke the silence, colder than before. From somewhere, ... Far away, she replied vaguely, her gaze still fixed on the dark road ahead. Jake couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't telling him the whole truth. He glanced at her from the corner of his eye, trying to get a better look, but it was as if she blended into the shadows, her face flickering in the dim light. Minutes passed, and the fog seemed to thicken further, enveloping the car like a suffocating blanket. It was as if they had entered another world entirely, one where time didn't exist and the road had no end. He looked at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the eerie glow of headlights behind them, but the road was as empty as it had been when he first picked her up, just as Jake began to feel a growing unease. The woman spoke again. "Don't turn around," she said, her voice low, almost a whisper. Jake's blood ran cold. He glanced nervously at her. "What do you mean?" Her eyes flickered to his for the briefest of moments, and her lips curled into a tight smile that made Jake's skin crawl. "There's something behind us," she said, almost casually. "Something you don't want to see." Jake's heart pounded in his chest, his instinct screaming at him to pull over and let her go. But before he could act, the car lurched forward, the tires screeching against the wet asphalt as though the road itself was rejecting them. He slammed on the brakes, but the car refused to stop. The fog closed in even more, suffocating the road in a swirling, impenetrable wall of white. Jake's hands shook as he gripped the steering wheel, struggling to regain control. The eerie silence of the road had vanished, replaced by a loud, buzzing sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. And then he saw it in the rearview mirror. The figure of a man appeared, standing just outside the reach of the headlights. He was tall, wearing a black coat that billowed around him, and his face was covered by a wide-brimmed hat. He stood motionless, staring at the car, his presence unsettling in its sheer stillness. Jake's heart skipped a beat. He couldn't take his eyes off the figure, unable to look away, as if the man was drawing him in with some unseen force. "Who is that?" Jake whispered, his voice trembling. The woman beside him didn't answer. She simply stared ahead, her expression blank. Her lips barely moved as she spoke again. "Whatever you do," she said, "don't stop the car." Jake's heart pounded in his chest as his hands gripped the steering wheel with white-knuckled force. His foot was still pressed against the gas pedal, but the car barely seemed to move, as though it was trapped in some kind of surreal limbo. The man in the rearview mirror remained perfectly still, staring at them, and for a moment, Jake wasn't sure if he was seeing things. The fog was so thick now that the world outside the car felt completely unreal, as though they had entered another dimension entirely. "Don't stop," the woman repeated, her voice growing more urgent, her eyes never leaving the road ahead. Jake's grip on the wheel tightened, and he tried to push the gas pedal further, but the car seemed to be stuck, moving at a crawl. His breathing quickened, and the sound of his own pulse was deafening in his ears. The figure behind them didn't move. He stood there in the mirror, his face obscured by the brim of his hat. But Jake could feel the weight of his gaze pressing into him, pulling at him with some unknown force. It was like the man was inside the car with them, somehow, even though he was still standing in the fog. "Who is he?" Jake asked, his voice barely above a whisper, fear creeping into his throat. The woman's face remained emotionless, but her eyes flickered to Jake, a flash of something almost like pity in them. "He's not real," she said quietly. "Not in the way you think." He's not someone you can see. He's something you shouldn't see. Jake didn't understand. None of this made sense. He turned to look at the woman, but she had already turned her head toward the fog again. Her eyes fixed ahead, as though she was waiting for something. "What do you mean, not real?" he asked desperately, the words tumbling from his lips. "What is he? Who is he?" The woman remained silent, her lips moving slightly as if she were muttering something under her breath. But it wasn't words that came out. Instead, it was a strange, guttural sound, like a low, growling hum that reverberated through the air. Jake could feel the car slowing even more, the engine sputtering in response to the woman's strange murmurs. He tried the gas again, but the car refused to respond. Panic surged through him, and he glanced back at the rearview mirror. The man was closer now, almost standing right behind them, his form almost spectral in the fog. He took a slow, deliberate step forward, his head still tilted downward, his body rigid and unnaturally still. But even as Jake watched, the man seemed to shift his shadow, stretching and contorting in a way that didn't seem possible. "Please," Jake begged, his voice cracking. "What's happening?" The woman turned to him, her expression still cold. But there was something in her eyes, now a flicker of something that almost looked like fear. "You can't stop," she said softly. "If you stop, he'll take you. He'll take you both." Jake's pulse quickened as the words hit him like a cold wave. He looked back in the rearview mirror again. The man's face was still hidden, but now there was something wrong about the way he stood. The silhouette in the fog began to shift, his body stretching impossibly tall, his limbs elongating like a twisted shadow. Without thinking, Jake slammed his foot down on the gas pedal again. The car lurched forward, jerking as if it had been given a new burst of life. But it didn't feel like Jake was in control anymore. The car seemed to have its own momentum, pushing them forward through the thickening fog, faster and faster. The mist around them grew denser, until Jake could barely see more than a few feet in front of him. The headlights barely cut through the suffocating fog, casting weak beams that seemed to be swallowed by the endless white haze. "Why won't you help me?" Jake shouted at the woman, his fear turning to anger. "What's going on? What do you want from me?" The woman turned her gaze toward him, her eyes dark and unreadable. Her lips curled into a faint, chilling smile, but it was the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You don't understand," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "You're already part of it now. You've already seen him." Jake didn't know what she meant, but the terror building in his chest was becoming unbearable. He tried to focus on the road, but it felt like the world itself was closing in on them. The car lurched again, and the sound of something scraping against the undercarriage echoed through the vehicle, making Jake jump. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice breaking. "What do you want from me?" For the first time, the woman seemed to hesitate. She looked at him, her face softening for just a second before her expression hardened again. "I'm not the one you should be asking," she said, her voice barely audible over the sound of the engine. "You need to ask yourself why you picked me up." Jake opened his mouth to respond, but the words died in his throat as something suddenly slammed against the side of the car. The impact was so forceful that it made the vehicle swerve, sending Jake's heart into overdrive. The man was there. His form was now pressed up against the window, his face still obscured by the brim of his hat. But there was no mistaking his presence now. The darkness that surrounded him was unnatural, as though he was made of shadows themselves. Flickering in and out of reality, Jake tried to scream, but no sound escaped him. His hand shot to the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. The fog outside seemed to thicken even more, and the car felt like it was suffocating, locked in a place that wasn't even on the map. The woman, still eerily calm, reached over and gently touched Jake's arm. Her cold fingers sent a chill up his spine. "You can't fight it," she said softly. "Not now. It's already begun." Just as Jake felt like he was about to lose his mind, the world outside the car began to change. The fog began to clear, the road stretching out before them in the eerie, distorted light. The landscape was no longer familiar. Thing looked right. The trees, the road, the sky all seemed to shift, bend, and warp, as if they were no longer in the real world at all. In the distance, a shape appeared, Blackstone. The town the woman had mentioned, but it wasn't a town like any other. It was a place trapped in time, stuck between the living world and something much darker, and they were about to arrive. Story 2, *, The Shadows of Shady Pines. Shady Pines was a town that felt like it belonged in another time. A place where secrets hid behind the thick woods that bordered it. It was the kind of place where every house seemed to be hiding a story. A town that was full of histories too disturbing to be remembered. I should have left when I had the chance, but the money was good, and I had nowhere else to go. That was my mistake. It was just after midnight when I took the night shift at Shady Pines' only diner. A run-down place called Marv's. The diner was a relic from the past, with cracked vinyl booths and a neon sign that flickered intermittently, spelling "eat" in a broken, almost mocking way. I had been working there for a few months, but I'd never gotten used to the oddities of the town. The people were friendly enough, but there was something about their eyes, something empty, as if they were hiding something. The first few nights were quiet, too quiet, but that night felt different. A strange tension hung in the air, as if the town was holding its breath. The only sound inside the diner was the faint hum of the old refrigerator and the buzz of the neon sign outside. The clock on the wall ticked away the minutes, the seconds dragging like an eternity. It started with a single customer, a man who came in shortly after midnight. He was a tall figure, wearing a long coat that looked too heavy for the warm summer night. His face was hidden under the brim of his hat, and he moved like a shadow. He didn't sit at the counter like most of the locals. Instead, he chose a booth at the farthest end of the diner, as far away from everyone as possible. At first, I didn't think much of it. He was just another late-night traveler, looking for a cup of coffee and a piece of pie. But as the night went on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. His eyes never left the menu. He didn't order. He just sat there, his gaze fixed on the laminated pages in front of him, as if he were waiting for something, waiting for someone. Around 1 a.m., a second figure arrived. This one was a woman, dressed in a long black dress that almost seemed out of place for the time and the weather. She had a strange, ethereal quality about her, and her presence seemed to darken the air around her. Like the man, she didn't speak. She didn't order. She simply walked to a booth opposite him and sat down, her eyes never leaving the man. I tried to keep my distance, but I couldn't help but feel drawn to them, as if something was pulling me toward that dark corner of the diner. My heart started to race, and a cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck. I knew something was wrong. I just couldn't place what it was. It wasn't until the third person arrived that the unease turned into terror. The third figure was a tall woman, her hair long and black as night, and she moved with an eerie grace. She didn't look at anyone in the diner. She didn't glance at me as I nervously wiped down the counter. She walked straight to the farthest booth, where the man and the other woman sat. She didn't say a word, just slid into the booth next to the man, her face hidden behind a veil. At that moment, everything went still. The air grew heavier, and the shadows in the diner seemed to stretch longer, darker. My instincts screamed at me to run, to get out of there, but I couldn't move. It was as if my feet were glued to the floor. The man looked up, finally meeting my gaze. His eyes were empty, void of emotion, like two black pits. Then the woman in the veil spoke, her voice low and cold. "You've seen us now," she whispered. "You're a part of this now." I froze. The words hung in the air like a curse, and I felt my heart thud painfully in my chest. I tried to speak, but no words came out. My throat tightened as if something was closing in on me, squeezing the breath out of me. And then, just as suddenly as they had arrived, the three figures stood up and walked out of the diner without a single word. They left the door open, and I could hear the soft rustling of leaves outside in the wind. The door closed with a soft click. I stood there, frozen for a moment, my mind racing. What had just happened? Who were they? And why had they said that to me? I took a step toward the door, my body moving of its own accord. I needed to know what was going on. I needed answers. But when I reached the door, something stopped me. The diner was quiet again, and the street outside was empty. No sign of the three figures. It was as if they had never been there at all. I turned back to the diner, my hands shaking. I glanced at the booth they had been sitting in, and the seat was still warm, the remnants of their presence lingering in the air. The next few days were a blur. The town seemed to grow quieter, the days stretching into an endless, suffocating silence. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, following me. I couldn't escape the thought of the three strangers and the words they had spoken. I decided to do some research, to see if I could find any answers. But what I uncovered only made things worse. There was nothing about Shady Pines in any history books or records. It was as if the town had been erased from existence. The people of Shady Pines wouldn't talk to me about it. They wouldn't even acknowledge my questions. They just smiled, nodded, and looked away. I had to know more. I had to find out what happened to the people who lived here before, to understand why the town felt so empty, so wrong. I started asking around, and that's when I heard the story. There were rumors of strange disappearances, people who had vanished without a trace, leaving only their clothes behind. Whispers of something ancient, something that had lived in the woods surrounding the town for generations. Some said it was a curse, others claimed it was the land itself, hungry and waiting for the next victim. But no one would give me a straight answer. The tension in the town had been building for days, and every time I looked at the woods, I felt a growing sense of dread. I had to find out what happened in Shady Pines. I had to face the truth. But the closer I got to uncovering the mystery, the more I felt like I was being pulled into something I couldn't escape. The following days passed in a strange blur, like I was stuck in a world where time moved differently. Every night after work, I found myself walking through the streets of Shady Pines, drawn to the woods that seemed to haunt the edges of the town. The air was thick with an unnerving quiet, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves or the distant hoot of an owl. It felt like something was always watching, waiting just beyond the trees, just out of sight. That's when I decided to visit the old library on the outskirts of town. If anyone had the answers, it was the elderly librarian, Ms. Holloway. She had been the town's keeper of records for as long as anyone could remember. I had heard her name whispered in hushed tones, but no one ever dared to talk about her openly. They said she knew things that no one else did. The library itself was a dusty, dimly lit building tucked between two houses that looked like they were on the verge of collapsing. Its windows were coated with grime, and the door creaked as I pushed it open. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of old books, and the faint sound of a clock ticking in the background added to the eerie atmosphere. Ms. Holloway was sitting at the front desk, her sharp eyes peering over a pair of glasses perched on the tip of her nose. She looked ancient, her skin pale and thin, her hair a silvery mass that hung in loose waves around her face. She didn't say a word when I entered. Her gaze was heavy, as though she had been expecting me. "I need to know about Shady Pines," I said, my voice almost trembling. "The town's history, the people who used to live here." She was silent for a long moment before finally speaking, her voice low and gravelly. "You should leave, young one. Some things are better left buried." But I wasn't going to back down. Something deep within me refused to let it go. I needed to understand what was happening, what had happened. I needed to know why the town felt so suffocating. "Please," I pleaded, my voice softening. "I have to know. It's like something is pulling me toward this town. I can't stop thinking about it." Ms. Holloway stared at me for what felt like an eternity. Finally, she reached for a thick, leather-bound book on the shelf beside her and opened it to a page marked with a faded, yellowing bookmark. "The Shady Pines story isn't one of light," she began, her voice steady but heavy with the weight of unspoken truths. "This town was built on secrets, on the kind of darkness that never fully fades." She paused, her gaze flickering toward the window as though checking to make sure we were alone. "It all started over a century ago, with a group of people who came to Shady Pines seeking a new beginning. They built homes, worked the land, and lived in peace for a while. But soon enough, strange things started happening. People began to disappear. Livestock went missing. The ground would tremble at night, and strange noises could be heard coming from the woods. "Is that when the curse began?" I asked, almost breathless. She nodded slowly. "It wasn't just a curse. It was something more, something ancient. The woods around here are old, older than anything we understand. The people who lived here before us made a pact with something that should never have been awakened." I felt a chill run through me, and I shivered involuntarily. "What was it?" Ms. Holloway's eyes flickered with fear, and for the first time, I saw something in her expression that I hadn't expected: genuine dread. "They called it the Hollow One, a creature of the forest, an ancient force that fed on the souls of the living. It was never meant to be disturbed, but the settlers, in their ignorance, woke it. They performed rituals, believing they could control it, keep it bound to the woods. But they were wrong." Her voice trembled slightly as she spoke, and I could see that the memories of what had happened were too much for her to bear. Over time, more people disappeared. The woods began to claim them, and then something worse happened. The people left behind, the ones who didn't disappear, became hollow. Their souls were gone, taken by the Hollow One. What was left were just empty shells of people, moving through the town as though nothing had changed. But in their eyes, they were no longer human. I swallowed hard, the weight of her words sinking in. "Are they still here? The Hollow people?" Miss Holloway's eyes darkened, and she nodded slowly. Yes, they are always here, hiding in plain sight. You've seen them, haven't you? I didn't answer. I knew exactly what she meant. I'd seen them, the empty-eyed people who wandered the streets, the ones who never spoke, who never interacted, who just moved like shadows through the town. But that's not all, Miss Holloway continued, her voice a whisper now. The worst part is yet to come. The Hollow One isn't satisfied with the souls it has taken. It's growing, and it's waiting for the moment when it can claim the entire town. I felt my heart begin to race. What can we do? Is there a way to stop it? Her expression softened, but there was no hope in it. There's nothing you can do. The Hollow One has already marked this place. You're part of its plan now. Once it's had its fill, Shady Pines will disappear, just like the others before it. I stood there in stunned silence, the weight of her words pressing on me like a physical force. There was no escaping it. No matter what I did, I was already a part of the town's dark history. As I left the library that night, the wind howled through the streets, and the shadows seemed to grow longer. I couldn't shake the feeling that the Hollow One was watching me. The woods beyond the town felt like they were closing in, and the echoes of the past whispered in the back of my mind. I could feel it, now for the presence of something ancient and evil, waiting for the right moment to take everything. And that moment was getting closer. Story 3, The Forgotten Road, USA. Lena had always loved the calm, peaceful quiet of small towns. After leaving her fast-paced life in the city, she'd relocated to the small town of Melville, tucked away between the rolling hills of the Midwest. The town was everything she had dreamed of. Serene, friendly neighbors, small businesses lining the streets, and vast open fields stretching for miles. But there was something off about Melville, something Lena couldn't quite put her finger on. It wasn't the people, they were kind and welcoming, but rather the way the town seemed to sit still, as if it were holding its breath. Lena had heard the stories from the locals, stories about strange events that had happened decades ago, things that never quite made sense. There were whispers about the old abandoned road just outside of town, the one that no one ever mentioned by name. People simply referred to it as the Forgotten Road. Some claimed it was cursed. Others said it was haunted, but Lena dismissed it as the stuff of small-town folklore. One evening, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, Lena found herself driving along the edge of town, trying to get familiar with the area. Her GPS directed her to a back road, and she, without thinking much, decided to take it. The road was narrow and winding, flanked by tall trees that seemed to close in on either side. As the road grew darker, Lena noticed that her phone had no signal, and the only sounds were the tires on the gravel and the occasional rustling of the trees. After several miles, the road twisted sharply to the left, and Lena found herself at the foot of a bridge. It was an old, wooden structure with planks missing and some parts sagging under its own weight. The moonlight reflected off the water beneath it, but the area felt strangely hollow, as though the very air around it had been drained. Lena hesitated for a moment, unsure whether she should continue, but her curiosity won out. She slowly drove over the bridge, the old wood creaking beneath her tires. As she crossed, she felt a chill run down her spine. Something didn't feel right. The woods around her were unnervingly quiet, and the air seemed to grow colder as she drove deeper into the forest. As she continued down the road, the trees grew thicker, and the path became rougher, harder to navigate. Her headlights cut through the darkness, but the deeper she drove, the less she could see of what lay ahead. She checked her rearview mirror, and for a moment, she could have sworn she saw a figure standing in the distance, at the edge of the bridge, watching her. But when she looked again, the figure was gone. Lena tried to shake off the uneasy feeling in her chest, telling herself it was nothing. But her nerves only grew worse as the road ahead became more treacherous. The trees seemed to close in on her from both sides, the shadows growing longer, stretching like dark fingers across the path. The silence was suffocating, and the only sound that filled the car was the hum of the engine. Then, out of nowhere, the headlights flickered. For a split second, the entire world around her went dark, and Lena slammed her foot on the brake. The car came to a stop with a jolt, and she breathed heavily, looking around, her pulse racing. "Come on," she muttered, trying to start the car again. The engine sputtered but didn't turn over. She tried again, but this time, the car remained silent. Panic set in. Lena opened the door, stepping out into the cold night air. The road ahead was completely deserted, no signs of life anywhere. The only thing she could hear was the sound of her own breath and the faint rustling of the leaves. She looked around for help, but there was nothing. She wasn't sure which way to go, back to the bridge or forward into the darkness. Then, a low voice interrupted her thoughts. "You're lost." Lena froze, the hairs on her neck standing on end. She turned slowly, and there, standing in the shadows, was a man. His figure was tall and thin, dressed in worn, tattered clothes, his face shadowed by the brim of his hat. "Who are you?" Lena demanded, her voice shaky but firm. The man didn't answer. Instead, he slowly took a step toward her, his eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. His movements were slow and deliberate, like he wasn't in a hurry. Lena took a step back, her heart hammering in her chest. "You shouldn't be here," he said softly, his voice raspy. "This place, it's not for you." "Where am I?" Lena asked, trying to steady her breathing. "What is this place?" The man tilted his head slightly, as though considering her words. "The forgotten road," he said at last, his voice filled with an eerie calmness. "No one leaves once they've come this far." Lena felt a cold knot form in her stomach. She tried to take another step back, but the man was closer now, just a few feet away. She could see his face more clearly, now a gaunt, hollow-eyed stare that seemed to look straight through her. "What do you mean?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Why can't I leave?" The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped even closer, his movements unnaturally slow. His eyes locked onto hers, and for the first time, Lena felt a surge of fear she couldn't explain. "The road takes what it wants," he said in a low, almost soothing voice, "and tonight, it wants you." Lena's heart raced in her chest, her mind spinning with 100 thoughts, none of them good. The man in front of her was no longer just a stranger. There was something about him that felt ... wrong. His eyes gleamed with an unnatural light, and his presence felt suffocating, like the very air around him had thickened with malice. What do you mean?" Lena stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "I just want to leave." The man's lips curled into a strange, almost pitying smile. "It's too late for that," he said, his voice colder now, his words stretching in the still night air. "Once you've entered this road, you become part of it. It doesn't matter if you walk away or run. The road claims those who find it." Lena felt her throat tighten, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She turned her head to look around, desperately seeking an escape, but there was nothing. Just the oppressive darkness. the trees stretching upward like towering specters, and the bridge behind her, now barely visible in the distance. She tried the car again, her hands shaking as she gripped the wheel. The engine sputtered but didn't turn over. Panic began to rise in her chest, and she turned to face the man again. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice trembling. "What do you want from me?" The man's smile faded, and for a brief moment, his expression softened. "I don't want anything," he said quietly. "I've been here longer than you know. I'm just the keeper of the road." Lena's mind raced, her thoughts struggling to make sense of what he was saying. A keeper of the road. It sounded absurd, but something deep inside her told her that this man, this thing was no ordinary traveler. "What do you mean?" she asked again, this time with more force. "What is this place? Why does it take people?" The man stepped back slightly, his eyes glinting in the pale moonlight. He tilted his head as if considering the question carefully. Long ago, before the road was forgotten, it led to a place where people could leave their pasts behind, he began. People who had nothing left, people who wanted to disappear, would walk this road to start anew. They thought it was an escape, but they didn't realize. They were being led here, led to a place where they could never leave. Lena felt a cold shiver run down her spine. "A prison?" she whispered. "Not exactly," the man replied, his voice distant. "More like a limbo. A place where people's spirits are trapped. They can walk, they can talk, but they're never truly free." Lena's heart pounded in her chest. She was starting to understand, and the realization terrified her. The road wasn't just a forgotten path. It was a trap, a place where lost souls lingered, forever bound to its winding path. "Are you saying I'm one of them now?" she asked, her voice barely audible. The man gave a slow, sad nod. "Once you've seen it, once you've stepped onto the road, it's too late to turn back. You belong here now, just like the others." Lena's knees felt weak, her breath shallow. Her mind raced, trying to come up with some way to escape, some way to prove that she wasn't trapped here, but the man's words echoed in her head. "You belong here now? Why?" she whispered, almost pleading. "Why does this road exist? Why does it take people?" The man's eyes flickered with something regret, perhaps, or something darker. He took a slow step closer to her, and Lena instinctively took a step back. The air around them felt colder, heavier, as though something was closing in. "The road exists because people made it," he said, his voice filled with a strange sorrow. "It was built on hope that people could leave their pasts behind and start over. But hope is a powerful thing. When you try to escape your past, when you try to run away from what you've done, the road becomes something else. It becomes a trap." Lena shuddered, her mind trying to process the weight of his words. She couldn't stay here. She couldn't let this road claim her too. But as she turned to run back to her car, the sound of something shifting in the trees caught her attention. A low, guttural growl echoed from the darkness ahead, and Lena froze, her heart racing in her chest. What was that? She gasped, her voice trembling. The man's eyes darkened. "You should never have come this far," he warned. "The road knows when it has you, and once it does, it calls others to take your place." Lena spun around, searching for the source of the growl, but there was nothing in the darkness, only the sound of the wind rustling the leaves, the trees bending with an unnatural creak. But the growl grew louder, closer, until it felt as if something alive was approaching. The man took a step back, his expression shifting to one of dread. "It's coming. You have to run, now." Lena's heart pounded in her chest, and she turned, bolting toward the car. The growl was deafening now, a low, rumbling sound that sent shockwaves through the air. She reached the car door, her fingers fumbling for the handle, but it was stuck. The growl grew louder, more frantic. And then, just as she managed to open the door, the sound stopped. Silenced. Lena hesitated for a moment, her hand frozen on the door handle. The air was thick with tension. But then, without warning, a shape emerged from the trees' shadow, something tall and dark, moving toward her with an unnatural speed. Her breath caught in her throat as she slammed the door shut, her hands shaking. She turned the key, and the engine sputtered to life. Without looking back, she slammed her foot on the accelerator and sped down the road, her heart hammering in her chest behind her. The sound of the growl returned, louder now, as if something was chasing her. The man's warning echoed in her ears. "The road knows when it has you." Lena didn't dare look back, but the sound of something pursuing her haunted her every moment. Her mind raced, trying to process what had just happened, what she had just escaped from. She wasn't free, not yet, but the road was still there, behind her, calling to her in the dark. Story 4 ** The Whispering Pines of Pemberton Hollow. Pemberton Hollow had always been a quiet town, nestled deep in the hills of the Appalachian Mountains. Isolated from the bustling world, it was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and nothing much ever happened. But beneath the surface, there was something else, something dark that the townspeople had learned to live with, a secret that no one dared to talk about. It was the kind of secret that the elders would whisper about, never mentioning it aloud. And children were warned not to venture into the woods after dusk. The town's boundaries were defined by a dense forest of towering pine trees. People called it the Whispering Pines. It was an ancient forest, old enough to have stories that stretched back to the very founding of the town. The locals had a simple rule: stay away from the forest, especially at night. But for some, that wasn't enough. They ventured into the woods anyway, and some of them never came back. Maggie Allen, a journalist from the city, had heard the rumors. She'd heard of the disappearances, the strange sounds, and the eerie occurrences that seemed to plague the town. But she wasn't afraid. She was intrigued. Maggie was a woman of reason, a skeptic who believed that the truth could be found through investigation, not superstition. So when she received an anonymous tip about the Whispering Pines from a local source, she packed her bags and drove to Pemberton Hollow, determined to uncover the truth. She arrived on a rainy Friday afternoon, her car tires kicking up the wet dirt as she pulled into the town square. The streets were damp, and a heavy fog had begun to roll in from the mountains, cloaking the town in a mysterious haze. Maggie checked into the only inn in town, a weathered building with creaky wooden floors and a quiet, elderly woman at the front desk. The woman barely looked up as Maggie handed over her ID and room payment. "Here for the news?" the woman asked in a rasping voice, though it didn't sound like a question. Maggie nodded. "I'm doing some research on the history of the town. I've heard there are interesting stories about the woods." The woman's lips twitched, and she slowly nodded. "You'll find what you're looking for in the woods, that's for sure. But you won't like what you find." Maggie smiled politely, brushing the comment off. She took her key and made her way to her room, mentally preparing herself for what she hoped would be an intriguing story. Little did she know, she had just stepped into something far darker than she could have ever imagined. The next day, Maggie started her investigation. She began by speaking to the locals, many of whom had grown up in the town and had experienced the strange events firsthand. They all told her similar stories. People disappearing without a trace. Children hearing whispers in the wind. Shadows moving in the trees. But none of them were willing to speak in too much detail. Each conversation ended with a warning. You'd be better off leaving the woods alone. One man said with a hard stare. People go in, said an old woman who had lived in the town all her life, and they don't come back. But Maggie was undeterred. She went to the town library, looking through old newspapers and records. She found nothing but vague references to the Whispering Pines and stories of people who had vanished. Some of the older records spoke of a tragic fire that had claimed the lives of several families, leaving behind a dark mark on the town's history. But no one could explain what had happened in the woods after that, and no one dared to try. By the end of the day, Maggie had learned little more than she had already known. The townspeople were afraid of something in the woods, but no one could give her concrete answers. The last person she spoke to was the town historian, a reclusive man named Elijah Wells, who had been living in Pemberton Hollow for decades. He lived on the outskirts of town in a small, weather-beaten house that seemed to lean as if it were about to collapse. "I know what you're after," Elijah said after a long silence, his voice low and deliberate. "But some things are better left buried. There's a reason no one goes into those woods after dark." Maggie leaned forward, sensing the opportunity for the story she had been searching for. "What do you mean? What happened in the woods?" Elijah's eyes flicked nervously toward the window, as if the very mention of the forest might summon something. "The Whispering Pines have a history. People didn't just disappear. They were taken. And not by anything you'd understand." He paused for a moment, his lips tightening as if he were holding back some truth he couldn't bear to speak aloud. Finally, he muttered, "There's a reason the woods whisper." Maggie felt a chill run down her spine. "What do you mean?" He shook his head, standing up abruptly. "You should leave, Miss Allen. The story you think you're looking for, it's not one you want to uncover." But Maggie was stubborn, determined to get to the bottom of the mystery. She thanked Elijah for his time and left, her mind racing with questions. What had happened in the Whispering Pines? And what did Elijah mean by the woods whisper? That night, Maggie decided to venture into the forest herself. Armed with a flashlight, a camera, and a notepad, she drove to the edge of the Whispering Pines and parked her car. The air was thick with fog, and the forest loomed like a dark, impenetrable wall before her. Despite the cold, Maggie felt a burning curiosity that pushed her forward. She entered the woods cautiously, the crunch of leaves beneath her boots the only sound breaking the silence. As she ventured deeper, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The trees loomed taller now, their branches reaching out like long, gnarled fingers, blocking out most of the light from the moon. The whispers began slowly, barely audible at first. At first, Maggie thought it was just the wind, but as she continued walking, the whispers grew louder, more distinct. She stopped in her tracks, listening intently. It was a strange, unintelligible murmuring, almost as if the trees themselves were speaking. A sudden rustling sound came from behind her, and Maggie spun around, but there was nothing there. Her breath caught in her throat. She turned back to the path ahead, but this time, the whispers seemed to grow louder, more urgent. Maggie's heart began to race. The trees seemed to close in on her, their branches creaking and groaning. And then, out of nowhere, a figure appeared in front of her. A man. He was tall, cloaked in a dark, tattered robe. His face was hidden in the shadows of his hood, but Maggie could feel his eyes on her. His presence was overwhelming, and the air around him felt heavy, suffocating. "Who are you?" Maggie asked, her voice shaking with both fear and curiosity. The man didn't answer at first. Instead, he stepped forward, his movements slow and deliberate. The whispers seemed to rise in pitch, growing louder and more frantic as he approached, and then he spoke. "Leave this place." Maggie took a step back. "Why? What's in the forest?" The man's head tilted slightly, and he stepped closer, his voice now a low, rasping whisper. "You've come too far. You can't leave." The air around her grew colder, and Maggie felt as if she were being drawn into something she couldn't escape. Her vision began to blur, and her knees buckled beneath her. Maggie could feel the weight of the man's words pressing on her chest, suffocating her with an unbearable heaviness. She tried to speak, but the air was thick, as though the very atmosphere was making it impossible to breathe. The whispers surrounded her now, not just from the trees, but from within her own mind. They were incessant, pleading, begging for her to turn back. But it was too late. Something had already marked her. With an effort, Maggie managed to take a step back, her legs trembling beneath her. The man's eyes glinted from beneath the shadow of his hood, and his lips barely moved as he spoke again. "You've seen the truth now," he murmured, his voice a low, echoing whisper that seemed to vibrate in the pit of her stomach. "And now you belong to the forest." Maggie's heart raced. She wasn't sure what was happening, but everything about the situation screamed danger. She stumbled backward, desperate to escape the oppressive force that had descended upon her. The whispers were growing louder, maddening, like 1,000 voices calling out in unison. The figure in front of her stepped forward again, his body moving with unnatural grace. He was close now, and Maggie could feel a cold, invisible hand pulling at her soul. Her breathing was ragged, her chest tight, and as much as she wanted to run, her legs wouldn't obey. Suddenly, the man's hand shot out, grasping her wrist with a vice-like grip. His touch was ice cold, sending a jolt of fear through her entire body. "You're not leaving," he said, his voice sharp, like the sound of cracking ice. Maggie's vision blurred, and everything around her seemed to shift. The trees warped, their bark twisting into grotesque shapes, and the ground beneath her feet seemed to ripple like water. It was as if the forest itself was alive, and it was closing in on her. "Let go of me," Maggie screamed, her voice hoarse with fear. But the man didn't release her. Instead, he whispered something in a language she couldn't understand, a dark incantation that seemed to make the world around her pulse with energy. Her knees buckled, and she collapsed to the ground, her mind spinning in chaos. In that moment, the forest seemed to open up around her. The shadows stretched and twisted, revealing ancient faces and figures, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light. The whispers grew deafening, and Maggie felt the cold fingers of the forest tighten around her heart. The trees were watching her, their twisted branches reaching out like skeletal hands, hungry for her soul. "Please," she gasped, her voice breaking. "What do you want from me?" The man leaned down, his face now inches from hers. His eyes were black, deeper than any abyss, filled with an ancient malice. He smiled, but it was not a smile of comfort or reassurance. It was a smile of knowing that Maggie had no choice but to accept the truth she had uncovered. "The forest has always been hungry," he whispered, his breath cold against her ear. "And now you will feed it." Maggie's breath hitched as the ground beneath her feet seemed to vanish. The whispers crescendoed into a frenzy, filling her mind with 1,000 screaming voices, each one more terrifying than the last. And then, just as she thought she would lose herself to the madness, the man stood up and took a step back. Releasing her wrist, the forest was silent. For a brief, terrifying moment, the world seemed to freeze. Then, slowly, the whispers began to fade, but they never truly disappeared. The trees swayed in a gentle breeze, and the man was gone, leaving Maggie alone in the cold, empty forest. Her body was trembling, but she forced herself to stand. She couldn't explain what had just happened. The forest seemed unchanged, as if the horrors she had just experienced were nothing more than a fevered dream. But deep inside, she knew that something had shifted. She had witnessed something that no one should have, and the whispering pines had taken notice. With every step she took, the forest seemed to pulse with life, and the whispers lingered just on the edge of her consciousness, never far away. Maggie stumbled back toward the edge of the woods, her heart hammering in her chest. The fog was heavier now, clinging to the trees, and every step she took felt like she was being watched. She didn't know if the man would return, if the forest would come alive again, but the thought of staying was unbearable. Her feet carried her faster, until she reached the edge of the woods. As she stepped out into the clearing, the fog seemed to lift, and the oppressive feeling that had gripped her loosened slightly. The distant sound of the town's wind chimes echoed in the background. She turned around, looking back at the whispering pines. The trees loomed ominously, their shadows long and twisted against the fog. The whispers were still there, faint but ever present. Maggie had learned the truth about the whispering pines, but at a great cost. Back in the town of Pemberton, Holla Maggie returned to her room in the inn, her hands trembling as she tried to compose her thoughts. The shadows of the night seemed to follow her inside, lingering at the edges of her mind. She knew that she was forever connected to the forest now, that whatever had happened out there would never leave her. But she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more, something darker, waiting for her in the depths of the whispering pines. She sat at the desk, her mind racing as she tried to write down everything that had happened. The man, the whispers, the strange magic that seemed to pulse from the trees. But even as she wrote, she knew that the story wouldn't be enough. Words could never capture the terror she had experienced. There were no words for the things she had seen, the twisted faces, the eyes watching her from the trees. And then it happened. The wind howled outside the window, sending a chill through the room. The door to her room creaked open. Maggie turned sharply, her breath catching in her throat. There, standing in the doorway, was the man. His face was obscured by the shadows, but Maggie could see his eyes black, empty, and endless. "You thought you could leave," he said, his voice low and resonant. "But the forest never lets go." Maggie's heart pounded in her chest as she backed away from him, but it was too late. The door slammed shut behind her, and the room was plunged into darkness. Story 5. The forgotten town of Cuba Pedy, Australia, at the edge of the world. Nestled within the arid, desolate expanse of South Australia's outback, lies Cuba Pedy. It's a town unlike any other, carved deep into the earth itself. Known for its opal mines and subterranean homes, Cuba Pedy is a place where sunlight rarely touches the ground, and the harsh Australian desert keeps its secrets close. It's a town where the heat scorches the earth during the day and the cold bites at your bones at night. But what truly made Cuba Pedy stand apart was something far darker, something that no one, not even the locals, spoke of. Ben Thornton had never heard of the town of Cuba Pedy until the job offer came. a freelance photographer looking for a new challenge. He'd jumped at the opportunity to capture the wonders of the outback for a travel magazine. The idea of photographing opal mines, underground homes, and the surreal desert landscape was enticing, and the promise of good money only sealed the deal. He arrived in Cooper just after sunset. The landscape bathed in an eerie, blood-orange glow as the sun dipped below the horizon. The town was small, almost ghostly. There were a handful of buildings above ground, their adobe structures faded from years of exposure to the sun. Most of the residents lived below the surface, in houses and shops carved into the earth, to escape the oppressive heat above. The landscape was barren, devoid of any plant life, except for a few scraggly bushes. Ben checked into the only hotel above ground, a modest place made of stone with a thick smell of dust in the air. The owner, a middle-aged man named Colin, gave him a cursory tour of the hotel before explaining that most of the town's residents were miners, living in the underground homes to keep cool. He also mentioned that the town had an odd reputation. Some visitors came and left without a word. Others came back with strange stories, and a few never returned at all. Ben brushed it off as local folklore, the kind of stories people told to spice up an otherwise uneventful life. After all, he was here to work. He didn't need to get caught up in any oddball stories. But as the days went by, he started to notice things that didn't quite add up. At first, it was the quiet. Even for a town this remote, Cooper was unnervingly silent. The only sound during the day was the hum of air conditioners from the underground homes. No children played outside. No one walked the streets, and the people he did see seemed strangely distant, almost as if they were hiding something. Ben set out one afternoon to photograph the opal mines. Colin had told him that the mines were deep, stretching for miles beneath the earth, and Ben was eager to capture the otherworldly sights within. When he arrived at the mine, the manager, a grim-faced man named Jack, showed him around. The air inside the mine was thick with dust, the narrow tunnels dimly lit by flickering lights. Ben snapped a few photos, fascinated by the labyrinth of rock and opal veins that sparkled in the dim light. But as he explored deeper into the tunnels, Ben began to feel like he was being watched. It wasn't the usual feeling of someone observing you, it was much more sinister. Like something was following him, waiting for him to turn around. He heard faint scratching noises in the walls, like something was trying to get out. Finally, Jack led him to an ancient part of the mine, an area that was rarely visited. The walls here were covered in strange, hand-carved symbols, as if some long-forgotten people had lived here before the town was built. These were left by the first miners, Jack explained in a low voice. The ones who came here years before Cooper was founded. Some of them say the symbols have meanings, but no one really knows. Ben had heard rumors of mysterious symbols in remote places like this. Just another part of the local myths. But there was something about these that unsettled him. The deeper he looked at the symbols, the more he felt like they were watching him, like they were alive. That night, Ben tried to shake off the strange feeling that had clung to him. He returned to the hotel, but when he opened the door to his room, he found something unexpected. A small, neatly folded piece of paper sat on the bed. No one had entered his room, and he had left it locked, so where had it come from? The note was handwritten, the ink smeared in places, as though it had been written quickly. The earth remembers. Do not dig too deep. Ben froze, the words sending a chill down his spine. He had no idea what it meant, but he felt the weight of it like a warning. He thought of the strange symbols in the mine, the whispers in the dark. It was as though the town had a secret, something buried deep beneath the surface that no one wanted to talk about. The next morning, Ben decided to go to the library and do some research. The town's history was sparse, but he was determined to find anything that might explain the eerie atmosphere he had been feeling. He was greeted by an elderly librarian named Greta, who seemed hesitant when he asked about the town's history. "People come here to get away from their pasts," she told him softly, avoiding eye contact. "There's no real history to speak of. Just a few miners, some opal, and that's it." But as Ben was about to leave, she leaned in closer, lowering her voice. "You might want to leave soon. Some things are better left buried." The cryptic message lingered in his mind as he left the library, but he shook it off. He had a job to do, and he wasn't going to let a few strange incidents scare him away. However, that night, things took a darker turn. Ben was woken in the middle of the night by the sound of scratching at his window. At first, he thought it was just the wind, but then the scratching grew louder, more deliberate. He stood up, his heart racing, and made his way to the window. He couldn't see anything outside, just the endless desert stretched out in the darkness. But then, in the dim moonlight, he saw something that made his blood run cold. A figure, hunched over, was standing at the edge of the hotel's parking lot, its head tilted unnaturally as it stared in Ben's direction. The figure was completely still, its eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. Ben slammed the window shut, his hands trembling. He wanted to call the police, but something inside him told him not to. He had been in enough strange places to know that sometimes it was better to leave certain things alone. The next morning, Ben gathered his things and prepared to leave Cuba Pedy. He didn't know exactly what was happening, but he knew he wasn't going to stick around to find out. As he drove out of town, he glanced in the rearview mirror, and there, standing in the middle of the road, was the same figure. Its eyes glowed, and for a moment, Ben swore it was smiling. Ben's hands gripped the steering wheel as he tried to shake off the image of the figure standing in the middle of the road. His foot pressed harder on the accelerator, and the small town of Cuba Pedy slowly shrank in the rearview mirror. He couldn't explain the creeping sense of dread that had followed him since his arrival. The town, the mine, the eerie symbols, everything felt wrong, like a bad dream that wouldn't end. As he drove deeper into the outback, the barren landscape stretched out in every direction, the road seemingly endless. His car's tires kicked up a thick cloud of dust, the heat from the sun pressing down on him. Despite the open desert around him, Ben couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He glanced at the rearview mirror again, half expecting to see that figure. But the road behind him was empty. He tried to focus on the road ahead, but the image of the figure kept haunting his mind. Who was it? What did it want? Why had it been standing in the middle of the road, staring at him with those glowing eyes? He pulled over to the side of the road, hoping to clear his mind. The desert stretched out before him, an infinite sea of red sand and scrub. There were no signs of life, no sound except for the occasional rustle of the wind. The silence was suffocating. Ben stepped out of the car, trying to take in the vastness of the landscape. His boots crunched on the dry earth as he walked a few paces away from the vehicle. He was far from Cuba Pedy now, but he couldn't shake the feeling that the town's curse had followed him. He took a deep breath, trying to calm his nerves, when something caught his eye, a glint of metal buried in the sand. Curious, Ben knelt down and began to dig through the dust. As his fingers brushed against the object, he realized it was a piece of old, rusted metal. He pulled it out, revealing a strange, circular object. It looked like a piece of machinery, but it was unlike anything he had ever seen. The surface was covered in strange symbols, the same ones he had seen inside the mine. It seemed to hum with an unnatural energy, and as Ben held it, he felt a sudden cold rush through his body. He dropped the object in shock, stepping back as if it had burned him. His heart raced, and he quickly looked around, but there was no one else in sight. The wind howled, sending a chill down his spine. He couldn't shake the feeling that something had just awakened, something ancient and dark. Ben's instincts told him to get back in the car and leave, but the strange object still haunted him. He couldn't ignore the connection between the symbols in the mine, the note he had found in his room, and the mysterious figure that had been watching him. There was a story here, and Ben was determined to uncover it, no matter the cost. He got back in the car, the object now safely tucked into his bag. As he drove further into the outback, the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the landscape. The air grew colder, and the sense of isolation intensified. The road ahead seemed endless, stretching far into the horizon. The further Ben drove, the more the silence seemed to press in on him. His mind wandered back to Cuba Pedy, to the strange events that had unfolded there. The people, the symbols, the eerie feeling of being watched. None of it made sense, but all of it felt connected. And now, with the object in his possession, he couldn't help but feel like he had unwittingly become part of something much larger and darker than he had anticipated. As night fell, the temperature dropped drastically. Ben turned on the headlights, scanning the road ahead. The only thing he could see was the endless stretch of sand and scrub. The isolation of the outback was palpable, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something was following him. Lurking just beyond his vision, he glanced in the rearview mirror again. This time, he saw nothing. No strange figure, no glowing eyes. But something was different. The air around him felt heavy, as if the land itself was holding its breath. Ben's grip tightened on the steering wheel as he sped down the road, trying to push the uneasy feeling out of his mind. He had to keep moving forward, away from Cuba Pedy and whatever dark force had been awakened by his presence. But no matter how fast he drove, the feeling of being pursued never left him. Just as he thought he might outrun the fear, the headlights illuminated something ahead. It was a figure standing, motionless, in the middle of the road. Ben's heart stopped. He slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching as the car skidded to a halt. The figure remained in place, its face hidden in shadow. Ben's hands shook as he fumbled for his camera, knowing that he had to capture the moment, to prove to himself that he wasn't imagining things. He raised the camera and snapped a photo. But when the flash went off, the figure didn't flinch. Instead, it slowly turned its head toward him, its eyes glowing in the darkness. Ben's breath caught in his throat. The figure's eyes were the same as before, cold, empty, and lifeless. The same eyes that had stared at him from the middle of the road in Cuba Pedy. Before Ben could react, the figure took a step forward. Its movements jerky and unnatural, like it was walking against the wind. Ben's pulse raced, and his instincts screamed at him to drive, to escape. He threw the car into reverse and slammed the gas pedal to the floor. The figure didn't move as he sped away, but Ben could feel its presence, like a dark cloud following him through the night. His hands gripped the wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white. But no matter how fast he drove, the figure was always there, just at the edge of his vision. As the hours passed, Ben began to lose track of time. The road ahead was a blur, the landscape shifting between shadows and dust. The figure remained in his rearview mirror, never fading, never going away. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Ben saw a sign in the distant scuba peddy. He had circled back to the town. The sense of dread intensified, and Ben's heart sank. He had to stop. He had no choice. He pulled into the same hotel where he had stayed before, his mind racing with thoughts of what had happened. The same hotel, the same room, the same eerie silence. The strange note, the symbols, the glowing eyes, it all came flooding back. But when Ben entered the hotel, he found something even more unsettling. The lobby was empty, the desk unmanned. No one was there to greet him. The air was thick with dust, and the faint sound of scratching echoed through the empty halls. Ben's blood ran cold as he approached the desk, hoping to find anyone who could explain what was happening. But there was nothing, only silence. And then, from the corner of his eye, he saw it, the figure standing at the end of the hallway. Its eyes glowed in the dim light, and as it turned to face him, Ben realized something horrifying. It was smiling. Story 6 *. The radio room at Cape Wairoa, New Zealand. The night shift at Cape Wairoa was meant to be quiet. That was the whole point of the job. You sat in a concrete building on a cliff, watched the sea turn black, logged weather readings, and babysat an old marine radio relay that still served fishing boats when mobile coverage failed. I took it because it paid well and because I wanted distance from Auckland. Wairoa was barely a dot. One petrol station, one pub, one road that turned to gravel, then ended at the Cape. The relay building sat beyond the last house, fenced off from the wind like it expected something to try and get in. On my first evening, the outgoing operator, a thick-armed woman named Mara, gave me the handover with the tone of someone reading a safety briefing they did not believe would work. "Log the wind every hour," she said. "Check the backup generator at midnight. Keep the kettle off the old wall socket, it sparks." She paused at the doorway and looked past me at the radio rack. "If you hear a voice call your name on channel 16, she said, do not answer. Not even to say you can't hear them." I laughed once, because that is what people do when they do not know what else to do. Mara did not laugh back. "It's a busy channel," I said. "Boats call all sorts of things." "It won't sound like a boat," she said. "It'll sound like someone in the room behind you, and it will say your name like it knows you." She walked out before I could ask anything else. Her ute headlights vanished down the gravel. The fence around the building rattled in the wind. The sea below looked like oil inside. Everything smelled of warm dust and salt. 2 desks, a weather monitor, an ancient wall clock with a loud tick, a radio panel with too many knobs and a speaker that hissed even when nobody spoke. Above the main desk hung a laminated sheet. "Emergency channel 16. Keep clear, log all traffic." At 10 p.m., a trawler called in with an engine issue. Normal. At 10:30 p.m., a yacht asked for a weather update. Normal. I logged, responded, drank instant coffee, and listened to the building creak. By 11:45, the calls stopped. Only static and the tick of the clock at 11:58. The wall clock, HICCUPED. The second hand slowed as if it hit glue. It dragged, then stopped between marks. The tick died. The silence that followed felt too large for the room. I looked at my phone. The time did not change. The screen stayed on 11:58, like it forgot how to count. The radio speaker hissed. Then the hiss folded inward like someone squeezed it. A thin tone rose out of it. Not a beep, not a dial tone. A long, clean note that made my teeth ache. I stood up without deciding to. The building lights dimmed, not off, just wrong. The air smelled like rain and hot metal. The radio clicked. A voice spoke, clear as if the person stood beside my ear. Evan, my name. It was not crackly. It was not distant. It was not over water. It was close, calm, patient. I did not answer. My throat tightened anyway, like it wanted to say yes. The voice spoke again. Evan, open the logbook. My hand twitched toward the notebook on the desk. I stopped it with my other hand, gripping my own wrist hard enough to hurt. I stared at the speaker as if I could stare the voice back into wherever it came from. The radio clicked again. Evan. Read the last line. I looked down, not because I wanted to, but because the idea had already slid into my mind. The page was open to Mara's last shift. Her handwriting ran in neat blocks. The last line read, 112, no traffic. Heard my name. Did not answer. My skin went cold. The wall clock was still frozen. My phone still showed 11:58. The wind outside had stopped. Even the sea seemed quieter, like it was holding itself still. The voice returned. You're alone. It said it like a comfort, like it was telling me the hardest part was over. I backed away from the desk until my shoulders hit the back wall. The building felt smaller than it had 5 minutes earlier. The air felt heavy, like a pressure change before a storm. I forced myself to speak, but not into the radio, not to the voice. Shut up, I said to the empty room. The speaker hissed, then laughed. It was not a normal laugh. It was too smooth, like a recording played at the wrong speed. Then the voice changed. It became Mara's voice, perfect down to the tired edge of her accent. Evan, it said softly. It's me. I forgot my phone. Open the gate. My stomach dropped. I could almost see her outside the fence, tapping the chain, annoyed with herself. My body tried to move toward the door. I grabbed the desk and held on. The voice continued. Still, Mara, I'm freezing out here. Just open it. You can lock it again. The building lights flickered, once, twice. In the window glass, my reflection jumped. For a moment, it looked like someone stood behind me. I spun around. No one, just the back wall, the kettle, the emergency torch. I faced the window again. Something moved beyond the fence. Not headlights. Not a person walking. A shape, low to the ground, sliding along the gravel with no sound. The fence posts hid most of it, but I caught pale flashes between them, like skin catching light. The radio clicked. The voice became my mother's voice. Evan, love. Open the door. My mouth went dry. My mother lived in Australia. She would not be here. She would not be calling a marine radio channel. My brain knew it. My nerves did not care. The voice sighed, like it felt sorry for me. You don't understand what this place is for, it said, in its own voice again. Flat and close. It's not for boats. It's for answers. It's for calling. The note returned, faint in the background, like a tuning fork held to bone. Outside, something tapped the fence. A slow metal click. Then another. It moved along the chain link as if testing it. I stared at the gate through the window. The padlock hung there, still. The chain did not move. The clicking continued anyway, closer, as if the sound was inside the fence and outside it at the same time. The voice spoke again, gentle now. Walk to the door. Just a few steps. My feet shifted before I decided. I hated that. I hated how easy it was. I slapped myself once, hard, just to break the spell of it. Pain flashed bright. The room snapped into focus for a second. I ran to the desk, grabbed the emergency torch, and switched it on. The beam cut across the room. Dust drifted like tiny insects. I pointed it at the window. The fence line was empty, but the grass on the inside of the fence, right up against the building, lay pressed down in a long curve, as if something heavy had slid along it. The track led towards the back corner where the building met the cliff path. The radio clicked. "Good," the voice said. "You saw me." My heart hammered so hard it hurt the clock. On the wall made a single tick. The second hand jumped. Forward 1 mark. My phone changed from 11:58 to 11:59. Time had restarted, but badly, like a machine with stripped gears. The voice sounded pleased. "Now, we can do it properly," it said. A new sound came from the corridor behind the radio. Rack-dot footsteps, slow, bare, wet. I did not have a corridor. The building was one open room and a tiny bathroom. There was no space for footsteps to approach. From behind the equipment, the footsteps continued anyway. 1 step, pause. Another step, pause. The torch beam shook in my hand as I aimed it toward the back of the room. Nothing moved, but the air changed, like someone exhaled near my neck. The smell of salt turned sharp, like blood. The radio clicked. "Don't turn around," it whispered. I turned around. The bathroom door stood open. I had closed it earlier. I remembered the click of the latch. Now it yawned wide, black inside, like the room had grown a mouth. The footsteps came from there, but I still saw nothing. I backed toward the main door, keeping the torch on the bathroom. My hand found the door handle. Cold, metal, real. I pulled. The door did not move. I pulled harder. The handle flexed. The frame creaked. Nothing opened. It was like the building had decided it was not done with me. The radio speaker hissed louder, like it was breathing. "Evan," the voice said, "you're doing well. You stayed. You listened." The wall clock ticked again, 2 quick ticks, then stopped. The second hand trembled in place. My phone flashed 12:17 for one horrible moment, then snapped back to 12 o'clock, then 12:03, then 12:03 again. Frozen. I understood then. This was not a normal night shift problem. This was a trap built out of minutes. The voice softened. "People used to come here and wait for shipwrecks," it said. "They watched lights go out. They listened to the sea take names. Then they built this relay and gave it power. They gave it a throat." The bathroom darkness rippled like heat haze, except cold. Something stepped into the doorway. It looked like a person until the torchlight hit it fully. It was too tall to fit the space. Its shoulders bent at angles that did not match a human spine. Its skin was pale and wet, like something dragged from deep water, where its face should have been. There was only a smooth plane with shallow dents where eyes might have pressed from the inside. It tilted its head, and I heard the same clean note from earlier. Not from the radio, but from it. I could not move. My body locked. My mind screamed. The radio clicked. "There you are," the voice said, pleased. "Now you can answer." The thing lifted one hand. Long fingers, too many joints. Water ran off them in slow threads that did not fall, just hung in the air. Vibrating, it reached toward the radio rack like it wanted to touch the speaker. I forced my legs to work. I stumbled sideways to the generator switch panel. Mara had told me to check it at midnight. She had not told me why. Maybe she did not want to say the reason out loud. The panel had two switches, mains power and generator standby. A red warning label said, "Do not switch under load." I flipped mains power off. The lights died. The radio rack went dark. The constant hiss stopped mid-dash breath. In the sudden darkness, the torch beam felt thin and weak. The thing in the bathroom doorway shuddered, like I had pulled a thread out of it. Then, from the dark radio speaker, even with no power, a voice spoke anyway. Clever. The word came from everywhere. From the walls, from inside my teeth. The thing moved fast. One moment it stood in the bathroom doorway. The next, it was at the desk, leaning over the logbook. Its blank face inches from the page, as if reading without eyes. The torch beam swept over it and caught something wrong. Under the smooth face, faint shapes pressed outward, like mouths pushing from inside skin, trying to form words. My stomach lurched. I ran for the emergency cabinet, yanked it open, and grabbed the flare gun. My hands shook so badly, I almost dropped it. There were two flares, one red, one white. The thing's head tilted toward me as if it heard my breath. The voice returned. "Softer now. Don't burn the room," it said. "This is where we meet. This is where you keep the door open." I pointed the flare gun at the floor in front of the desk and fired the white flare. Light exploded, harsh, blinding. The room filled with thick smoke and a white glare. That made the corners vanish. The flare hissed like a living thing in the violent light. I saw the truth for a split second. The thing was not alone. Shapes pressed against the windows from the outside. Not faces, not quite. More like pale masks held up by hands that were not hands. Dozens of them. They made the fence look like a net full of caught fish. And in the flare light, the masks all turned at once toward me. The voice went sharp. "Stop." The flare's light flickered, then steadied. The thing by the desk jerked as if yanked by a hook. It slid back, not stepping, more like pulled across the floor without friction, toward the bathroom doorway. The pressed grass track outside made sense now. It did not walk. It arrived. I used the moment. I slammed the generator standby switch up. The building shook. The generator outside coughed, then roared alive. Lights snapped on, brutal and steady. The radio rack rebooted with a series of clicks. The speaker hiss returned. For 1 second, the room felt normal. Just a building. Just a machine. Just me. Then channel 16 opened by itself. A chorus of voices flooded the speaker, layered and close. My mother, Mara, my old friends. A teacher from childhood. A stranger whispering my name like a lover. All at once. "Answer," they said. The thing in the bathroom doorway lifted its hand, palm up, like it expected something to be placed in it. I understood what it wanted. A reply, a confirmation. A door opened from the inside. I grabbed the microphone. My thumb hovered over the talk button. I did not speak. Instead, I pushed the emergency distress switch that Mara had shown me earlier. Not a normal call. A full alarm burst that activated an automated beacon and logged a priority. Alert to the regional station up the coast. The speaker screamed with a piercing tone. The thing convulsed. The masks at the windows flinched back, as if the sound hit them like a wave. The voice snarled for the first time. "You do not call them." I held the distress button down until my thumb went numb outside. Wind slammed into the fence like it had been waiting for permission to move. The sea roared back to life. The building lights flickered, then steadied. My phone time jumped, stuttered, then began to count normally. Las 12:18. Las 12:19. The wall clock ticked. Steady, loud, real dot. The bathroom doorway was empty. The pressed grass track outside was still there. But the fence line was clear. No masks, no shapes. Just dark grass whipping in wind. The radio crackled. A real voice came through, distorted by distance and weather. "Cape Wairoa, relay. This is North Coast Control. We received your distress beacon. Confirm status." My throat worked. My mouth felt full of sand. I forced words out. "This is Evan," I said. "I'm at Cape Wairoa. I need someone here." The reply came quick. "Stay on, comes. Patrol is en route. ETA, 40 minutes. I did not let go of the microphone until dawn. When the patrol finally arrived, 2 officers and a technician walked the perimeter with torches. They found nothing outside, nothing inside, nothing in the bathroom. They looked at the pressed grass and called it wind and animals. They looked at my face and did not push too hard. Mara came back that afternoon. She walked in, saw the flare scorch mark on the concrete, and nodded once like she had expected it. "You did the beacon," she said. "Yes," I said. "What is it?" Mara did not answer at first. She sat at the desk and opened the logbook. Her finger traced the last line I had written in shaking pen. 12:17. Heard my name. Did not answer. Triggered distress. She closed the book. "It's a caller," she said. "It finds places with radios and lonely people. It mimics what you trust. It tries to get one clean answer out of you." "Why?" Mara looked past me, out at the sea. "Because once you answer," she said, "it can call you again, anywhere, any night. You become a channel." I left Cape Wairoa the next morning. I did not finish the week. Sometimes, late at night, when my phone is on silent and the room is still, I hear a faint hiss from nowhere, like a speaker warming up, then, very close. A voice says my name like it is testing the shape of it. I never answer. I stare at the dark and wait for the seconds to keep moving. Thanks for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe. Terror Mouth.